Since the early days, people have been obsessed with Mars. The red planet has ignited people's imagination. It has inspired books, films, songs, vitamins, bars, shops, restaurants, chocolates, and video games.
Phew, it's musty, but breathable.
Yes, lucky for us, it's enough to sustain human life.
From the looks of the cobwebs, nobody's been in here for a long, long time.
Nobody but the spiders, or whatever passes for spiders around here.
For a long time, it seemed to us that Mars is a dangerous place. That houses aliens who wish to steal our Christmas, or perhaps even Martians intending to attack Earth. Regardless of how funny these fantasies had seemed, we have never stopped secretly dreaming of visiting this planetary neighbor. Mars was so hot on our minds that in 1938, Orson Welles, a cinema legend to be, voiced H.G. Wells' cult novel, The War of the Worlds. It sounded so convincing on the radio that people ran out to the streets. They absolutely believed that Mars was attacking. Perhaps we do have our sensibilities about Mars. However, even though we suspect that our journey is one way, that the nature is much harsher than in Yakutsk, and that there is still much effort to be put into finding a way to be able to breathe there, if there was an offer to go on an interplanetary flight tomorrow, we wouldn't see the end of the queue of the volunteers. Let's not wait for tomorrow. Let's look at how we can do that right now. Mars is the second most suitable planet for human life in the solar system after ours. Photographs of Mars show traces of water and heaps of ice hidden underground. People guess that Mars used to have many bodies of water. There are also 4 seasons on Mars, albeit they are twice as long and usually have rather different temperatures from what we are used to. Mars is uncannily cold and extreme. This will not be good news for those running away from the crazy climate on Earth. Typical winter temperatures can fall as low as minus 125 degrees. Whereas, on sunny summer days, you can enjoy a temperature of 20 degrees. Still, the nights are freezing cold at minus 76 degrees. The sun reaches Mars, therefore it is possible to collect energy using solar batteries. The gravity is weaker. A stroll outside would require less energy, and scoring a point in basketball would be much easier. If all of this seems rather pleasant, you should hear the arguments against the interplanetary move. The atmosphere on Mars is rather thin. That means that the ultraviolet rays go straight through, and the dose of radiation is extreme. The soil on Mars is likely toxic and deadly to any living organism, so growing potatoes is not that straightforward. The water is hidden. Finally, the amount of oxygen is so low that it would be impossible to breathe outside without some type of aid.
We live on Earth. We have a thick atmospheric layer, a magnetic field that protects us against the harmful space radiation. During the trip, we would have to leave the Van Allen radiation belt that protects us against the energetic particles, and our traveling fragile bodies would be affected by the solar energetic particles and space radiation. These rays cut right through the spaceship in massive speeds and collide with our bodies. They damage our DNA chains, which then become corrupted. The human body is made in such a way that the DNA continues to multiply and the cells containing the corrupted DNA information change. This increases the risk for a person, a Martian to be, to fall ill with serious disease. Our nerve cells are also too sensitive for such radiation. Some research suggests that an individual may find that their sight will have deteriorated significantly during the journey. This radiation is one of the major hazards.
However, nobody can stop those who want to learn about our planetary neighbor. Since the 60s, the world has sent curious satellites to research Mars and has continued to marvel at every piece of news. At this very moment, there are several missions taking place on Mars. NASA has sent its Perseverance rover on their Mars 2020 mission, and it is already there searching for biosignatures and traces of life forms. Hope, from the United Arab Emirates, will be researching Mars' atmosphere and air. The Chinese Tianwen-1 will investigate whether there has been, or perhaps there is, life on Mars. With every image and example, we are expanding our knowledge and building a new Mars identity. However, not everyone is that patient. The enthusiasts are jumping ahead and throwing their money to ask, how much is the ticket? The world's rich have true intentions of touring between Earth and Mars. They are considered mad, visionaries, and cynical entrepreneurs. Yet, it is difficult not to marvel at their ambition. Elon Musk has presented SpaceX and has pledged to evacuate 1 million people from Earth in the event that Earth should face a serious danger in the future, for example, a nuclear war. Until then, SpaceX shall shuttle like a charter plane from Tenerife, 8 months one way. $500,000 for one ticket. There has not yet been any announcement as to the discounts for families, children, and the elderly. The return ticket is promised to be free. Yes, for those with slightly frozen noses and those giddy from all the fun at the entertainment venues on Mars. It is inevitable that on your flight, you will be using the NASA-tested Hohmann Transfer Orbit, whereby the spaceship is directly in such a way that it flies within a larger orbit than that of Earth around the Sun. It merges with the orbit of Mars, so you can effectively travel the distance, while also saving on fuel. Well, only if you haven't already been destroyed by solar radiation. A space journey is more than a romantic glance through a large window as seen in sci-fi films. Don't forget to say a prayer that over 16,000 pieces of outer space debris, each bigger than 10 centimeters, does not crash into your spacecraft. How did they get there? You will want to check with humans on that. The spacecraft, whose weight determines its ability to travel this distance, will not only have to house insane amounts of fuel, but also the means for developing life. This is not a simple journey. For example, SpaceX decided that the second fuel tank will be flying separate and will serve for topping up mid-journey. Those who wish to return to Earth will have to come up with a way to produce fuel there. When we imagine a future where we visit Mars, we cannot shy away from the topic that still painfully echoes across our planet: colonialism.
All
space programs that we're talking about and imagining at the moment are entirely utopic, elitist, commercialized, and tied to a certain colonial history. There are many views about space that come from the colonial perspective. We will travel to Mars or the Moon, and we will commandeer it, even though it does not in fact belong to us. We will establish a colony without getting a permission from the planet. Perhaps instead of traveling to another planet and possessing it, we could create a planet out of ourselves. Perhaps that way we would be more responsible. Indeed, in these times that can only be described as apocalyptic.
A reminder, Western colonialism manifested itself when big-headed Europeans began to occupy foreign territories and declare them their possessions. The first ones thundered at the end of the 15th century. To this day, we are dealing with the consequences of social, economic, racial, and cultural discrimination. The idea is simple. There are some who consider themselves better than others, and the matters of space are no exception. Suffering from grandeur, humans in the solar system are coveting not only for distant continents, but to divide entire planets. Who will win Mars? Will it be the first nation to set foot in it? Will it be free to all? Or maybe it will belong to no one. These issues seem so distant now. However, level with the first building, they will be extremely acute. Perhaps that is why we are already considering space law. I would think that space law is such a new branch of law. Again, it is more akin to international agreements, mainly because space doesn't belong to anybody, much like the protection of the oceans that do not belong to any country, except for a certain number of nautical miles from the coastline. This is done with the help of international agreements. Unsurprisingly, the most regulated thing is the access to the outer space. But there is another issue emerging at the moment, that of space waste. There are all sorts of photos online of space debris flying around the orbit and the like. We probably don't care about that as much, probably because it's a bit far, too far. Closer to us is fresh air and water. However, as you said already about our preparations to emigrate to another planet, I think the future holds certain environmental aspects in the outer space as well. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 dictates that the unlimited spaces can be operated and shared by all without any priority. So if some space commercial phony tries to sell you a few acres on Mars for a good price, please do not rush to part with your bitcoins. There is enough time on our journey to think about what the planets are in general, and if perhaps we can create one of some kind by ourselves. Yes, ourselves. Out of ourselves.
We are all made of space dust. Imagine, a naked body spends a certain time in space until it decays and becomes space dust. In this case, what is a person? And what can we consider human in these terms? For example, the disciplines, art and culture. Let's now imagine that even more people appear with a specific place in the outer space. The Lagrange point. Lagrange points are the points in between two celestial bodies that are orbiting each other, such as Earth and the Moon or Earth and the Sun. There are 5 points between the celestial bodies, where the gravitational pulls of each planet compensate each other. That is where you find true zero gravity. Imagine, you find yourself in the closest Lagrange point on the dark side of the Moon. The bodies float in the dark and eventually start gravitating towards each other. Any object that has mass also has a gravitational field. Eventually, our astrophysics calculations showed us that it would take 2 months for these bodies to stick to each other, to compress each other, and to then form a new celestial body. Not simply a new celestial body, though, but one that would approach the definition of a planet. A planet, as we know, is defined rather simply. It is a celestial body that can become round due to its gravity. But if we look at that number, 36 zeros, we will realize that we're so tiny and fragile. In order to form the smallest body, a planet, we would have to send all of the people on our planet into that very Lagrange point for more than 1 billion years. Suddenly, we realize our minuteness and how incomprehensive and infinite time and space are.
Okay then, instead of forming a planet out of people, perhaps we should visit a celestial body that already exists. Mars does have resources that would allow for a settlement. Nonetheless, a person who wishes to naturalize themselves will benefit from becoming less human. First of all, you will need a gigantic container, which will ensure the normal pressure. On Mars, it's only 1% compared to Earth. If you're not careful, your blood will boil. And we're not talking about Spanish dances or being angry. Very literally, your blood will start bubbling up. It's not a nice feeling. We have already mentioned that Mars lacks oxygen and has enormous radiation. It is likely that your accommodation will be 15 floors underground rather than a skyscraper with a view. Each building shall have its own water distillery for the H2O supply to soothe the spoiled Homo sapiens. Be careful regarding walks and unfiltered air. Mars is covered in toxic dust, which means that your lungs would be gone within a week or so after inhaling this. Long live the vegetarians. You can't hunt for meat on Mars unless it is grown in the laboratories. What can you do? Grow a parsnip or two, carrots, potatoes, especially the potatoes. If you have relatives on Earth, perhaps they will pack you a parcel of conserves that will sustain the journey.
In general, the soil on Mars is poisonous to humans. If you dig up some soil on Mars, water it, and then try to grow something from it, it is absolutely not going to happen. That is because this soil has perchlorates. These are toxic substances. Only cyanobacteria and lichen can survive that, and only in the simulated Mars soil. We have no real samples from Mars.
Don't forget to take 3D printers with you, because that will be a much more efficient way of acquiring what you need, starting from devices to tools to a printed pizza. All difficulties could go away if gene engineering continues to perform miracles. We would need to be sort of reprogrammed, genetically improved. We would need to achieve a biochemical triumph that would help us take the punches of Mars with less impact. We can become more resistant to radiation and pollution, and less dependent on the ideal biological conditions. Scientists see the red planet as a window into the Earth's past, as an opportunity to experience the primary that isn't corrupted by the motorways and shopping centers. It's like a history without the noise of civilization. However, Mars can also be considered a planet after trauma. For example, an ecological catastrophe, It is believed that a long time back we started under similar conditions. However, the deterioration of the atmosphere turned our neighborhood into a desert. Although we have fared much better, the combined efforts of humanity in recent decades to exploit everything possible from nature are taking their toll. The excessive consumption is bringing about a frightening reaction from the ecosystems. Who knows? It could be the freezing cold of Mars. In our dreams, or maybe nightmares, of people on other planets, we can reproduce the images of the journey there. Let's employ an ordinary school bus and some extraordinary screens. The first people to experience Mars were not some super astronauts, but pupils in Washington. On a sunny day, they boarded a familiar school bus and started on a seemingly routine trip. Suddenly, the windows darkened. Soon after, in the windows, the pupils saw their yellow school bus roaring through the canyons of the red planet. The children gasped in amazement and at the realness. The view in the windows matched the speed and turns of the bus perfectly. How did this happen? The windows of the bus were replaced with transparent screens that at first glance did not appear different from ordinary glass. At the beginning of the trip, the images of the US Capitol were replaced by a futuristic view of Mars. It was a virtual reality experience that did not require virtual reality glasses. The pupils were able to experience it all together. The effect was enhanced by the sound, which perfectly complemented the images. This is necessary for immersion in virtual reality. Travelers were also heard audio commentary about the living conditions on Mars and the technological solutions needed to settle on the Earth's neighbor.
The closest star to us is approximately 5 light years away, which means that even light would have to travel for 5 years to reach it. Achieving the speed of light is a huge and so far technologically unrealizable challenge for people. Nevertheless, if we created a spacecraft that traveled even 1,000 times slower than light, it would still reach such speeds that people could travel around our galaxy and colonize the entire Milky Way in a few million years. Even if we had such a spacecraft, traveling at the normal speed of a modern spacecraft would take hundreds of years to reach that star. Naturally, a single generation of people could not reach the star.
Perhaps the exploration on Mars will open new doors to learn about the world, to see the unseen forms of life, be it even in the form of bacteria, or to produce endless, shocking stories. However, the main story will be told as a glance back at Earth, our home. No one has expressed this glance more poignantly than the astrophysicist Carl Sagan.
That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, Our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand.